Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to essentially do an author review. Not review the author as a person, of course, but look at her works and talk through the different things that she has written, as I think this author is incredibly underhyped. I think that the world building within the stories that I have read by her is incredible. She does such a good job of fleshing everything out, of really thinking through what would the world be like if this was the setting, what would the culture be like, what would the political structure be like. She really thinks through all of that, and she really allows you to understand what's going on in such an organic, wonderful way. And then on top of all of that, I think so many of the things that we're kind of tired of seeing over and over again in fantasy, she has a way of not only circumventing those things and avoiding them entirely, but of doing different things and then doing them in a way that you feel so enchanted by, gripped by, and then you're like, oh, why can't we get more of this in our stories? So if you are already interested in any of these things, then likely something that I'm going to say about both of the works I'm going to focus on will be appealing to you. I will say she has recently written another story that is considered cozy fantasy from everything I've seen, and I believe it's also romance a little bit, a cozy romance. And if you are somebody who maybe you aren't really looking to pick up cozy fantasy, it's not really your thing, or you like cozy fantasy, but you also like all other kinds of fantasy stories, I don't want, with this book, it would seem maybe having more popularity than her previous works, just if my library holds anything to go by, then I want you to have a full view of what she is capable of, because she really can do so many different things. So the works that I'm going to be focusing on would be Race the Sands, which is a fantasy standalone, and then also her Queens of Renthia series. I have read Queens of Renthia quite a while ago, so you might have heard me mention it in the past, but if you've never heard of the series, the idea is that it is a fantasy world where the population is living among the forest spirits and within the forest itself. The way the forest spirits work is they have a very strong instinct to protect the forest at all costs. And as a result of human beings living within the forest, they do inevitably harm the forest. As you see, the way in which they navigate, they build among the treetops, they build cities in the trees, they build houses and villages and those sorts of things, and it causes some level of destruction. Even just like the zipline system and the cities themselves, the way all of that is described is so cool, and it makes me want so many more forest settings. But regardless, as a result of this structure, you do see these spirits wanting to kill humans. And the way in which they hold the spirits' instincts in check is they have a certain magic user among the people that has the ability to sort of connect with the spirits and then keep them away. And whenever that woman, as it's always a woman who has these powers, whenever she is starting to lose her hold on the spirits, a new person needs to fulfill her role. The main perspective of the story is somebody who, at the very beginning, she witnesses the true destruction of the spirits when they are let loose. However, that should never have happened, with the current queen supposedly still being well within her powers. But our main character knows that there is something going on, so she is determined, after witnessing this destruction, to go to essentially this magic school where she can learn how to control what little bit of magic she actually has. One thing that you're clued into pretty quickly in the story is that our main character is not even close to being the best. And that's something that already I really liked and I found was endearing about the main character. She has a lot of drive. She certainly has the motivation. However, a lot of times the chosen ones, sure, there's trials and tribulations, but they kind of pick everything up really quickly and they just get good at stuff. And maybe they're learning how to fight when they've never been taught before and everybody else has years of experience. And somehow, because their technique's a little different or because they just want it so badly, they beat everybody. They beat all the other kids. And you're just like, I want them to fail sometimes. You know, I want them to not always be the best. And you get that with this character, and it's refreshing. Plus, you really root for her, given, one, what you see from her at the beginning, but also just in general, she's a likable main character. And then from there, the other two books in this trilogy, there is a standalone that takes place within the same world. I've not yet read that one, but we have two more books within this trilogy, and they kind of focus on other characters that also have some magical abilities, and then you do see characters from the first book, and then you have these new characters that come into the picture as well. And even that setup is a little different from what we typically find with our trilogies. These are all incredibly short, they're really easy to fly through, and the setting itself, it just has so much life to it that I think it's unlike a lot of other things I've picked up. I will say, as a result, of course, of them being shorter, you don't get quite the level of detail that I like in my world building. I can be picky about the way in which we are given information about the world and the amount of detail. I love when we get a lot of detail when it's always related to the characters. And I like when it serves a purpose. It's not just going on and on and on and on about what everything looks like and what everybody's dresses are like and what fabrics they're made of and what colors they are. And you're like, well, how does this matter though? And I don't think she wastes your time, which is great. And I love the worlds. I just wanted to make sure that you know it's not going to be this epic where you get so many lush descriptions over and over and over again. You kind of get what you need and you understand the circumstances and it's woven into the story really well. It's just not going to be as full as what you typically find in more epic series or just longer series in general. Also, it's probably pretty clear, but because we do kind of shift focus across the series, you are potentially going to miss some of the characters that you got to know in the first one, as they are going to take a little bit of a backseat in the other entries. And then even though I really like this trilogy, and I'm obviously wanting to take the time to recommend it to all of you, I didn't love the landing. I don't think that the third book executed the landing quite as well as I was hoping. So I just want to give that heads up. Doesn't mean that it's not worth picking up. I certainly still think it's worth picking up. And it's not like it was the most horrible ending and it ruined the whole series for me. I just think that so many of the other strengths within this series are what make it something I enjoy, and one of those things is not the ending. The ending is not what makes this, because there are some books that you're like, this is pretty good, and you get to the end, and you're like, oh my gosh, this blew my mind, and then suddenly you love it. The ending's not going to transform the series for you. Now, getting over to Race the Sands. Maybe what I was talking about with Queens of Renthia already sounds great, and you want to check that out. So if that's the case, great. Race the Sands, if you're like, I don't know about that one. Race the Sands is very different. It's not like Queens of Renthia at all, with the exception, of course, of her world building still being fantastically done and interesting and different. So that's still present, but the stories themselves and the worlds themselves are totally different from each other. Where you saw this really interesting entire society built around the power of this queen and holding these spirits in check to keep everybody safe, over here you have a more desert setting with a slightly more traditional setup of there being this emperor who rules over the people, and then they have counselors that advise them, and these counselors are rooted in a religious organization with people known as augurs. So you have something that feels maybe a little bit more familiar to what we've seen in fantasy before, except done so well. And I'm going to compare it to a little bit Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I don't think the characters or the world itself feel that similar, but I just think the more you get into the story, the juicier everything gets, and the more you're like, oh, this is more than I was expecting. And it has that feeling, if you have read Warbreaker, you know, that you kind of start to get involved in almost court whisperings and everybody's scheming, and you're like, oh, okay, well, this person seems to have this plan, and I'm pretty sure that person over there is up to something. And you start to get that within Race the Sands, and you wouldn't expect it when you hear the synopsis. Also, I will say, when I heard this synopsis, and this is in part why it took me so long to pick this up, I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure that's going to be my cup of tea. It sounds too small, too low stakes. Trust me, it's not. It's so good, and it gets so high stakes, way higher stakes than I expected. Getting to that setup, though, we follow a woman named Tamara, who is pretty down on her luck. She is doing everything she can to earn enough money to essentially maintain custody of her daughter. In their world, you have these religious figures known as augurs, and augurs have the ability to kind of read your soul. And if your soul is not doing well, it is clear that you are going to be reincarnated when you die as a lesser being. But if you are doing well, then great, keep it up. The augurs will let you know about that. However, if your soul is so far gone, you are going to be reincarnated as something known as a keyhawk. And the downside to becoming a keyhawk, and the reason you want to avoid this at all costs, is that keyhawks are pretty much constantly in a cycle of being reincarnated as Keyhawks. They are never going to get out of being this kind of creature. There is one exception, and that is if a Keyhawk is raced in this deadly race, you achieve first place, then there is magic that can occur that can transform you into something else. You can be reincarnated as something finally different. So our main character Tamara previously used to coach and race. However, you understand at the beginning of the story that something has occurred. She has significantly lost all of the good associated with her reputation, and she's doing everything she can to scrape by. Her daughter is showing signs of having the magical abilities associated with augurs, so she has to go to a school to learn more about how to read souls, and there is no, you get to decide whether you do this or not. If you're showing those signs, you have to go to this school. So she already doesn't get to see her daughter very much as is. However, on top of all of that, if she doesn't have enough money to be able to make everything work with the augurs, then she is pretty much going to have to give her daughter to the augurs permanently. And so you immediately are like, no, you do not want her to lose her chances of getting to have a good relationship with her daughter. She clearly loves her daughter. And also you don't get to see very many parent-child relationships and stories, especially good ones too. When you do see them, they're awful and they're basically showing you why the main character is traumatized. But this one, you're like, oh, they're cute. Yay, a mom and daughter, except for people are trying to pull them apart. And so you also have this view of the augurs where you're like, well, they're taking her away, so I don't like that. And then you're wondering like, well, I guess the augurs, though, are important for society because they help give people hope. They help people go down a better path in their life. And you very much are seeing that they are integral to their society, but it makes you question, well, should any entity, we'll call them, have that much sway over the population? And then you're maybe wondering, like, what does the races have to do with this? How is that related to the story? Because it is called Race the Sands. So our main character, Tamara, in order to try to make enough money so that she can continue to see her daughter, she decides that she is going to partake in the coaching of a new rider, and she has to find a Keyhawk that her rider can actually have, and then they're going to try and win it all and get the first place. And that is the part of the story that I was like, I don't know. A racing story doesn't really sound like the most compelling thing to me, but oh my gosh, the way in which the story goes in a completely different direction than you expect, it just gets better and better as it goes. And she also has some moments where you're like, wait, no, I'm upset now. And you also expand and you get more perspectives than just Tamara, and I really enjoy that as well. Even though Tamara is a great parental figure and it's so refreshing to see that, there is another perspective that does not have a good relationship with her parents. And then if you are somebody who really likes, I guess I'll call it political fantasy, but just in general, stories where there's a lot of intrigue and corruption and you're kind of trying to piece together who's good and who's bad. If you like those things in your stories, then you're probably going to quite like this one. Plus, it's a standalone, and I know for a lot of people, standalones are a little bit easier to get into than series. So if that sounds appealing to you, Race the Sands might be a good one to check out. In general, both of these stories I think are quite underhyped, and I would definitely encourage you, if they sound good, to give them a try. I really enjoyed both of these. I think Race the Sands took me a little bit longer to get into. When I first started it, as I have said already, the setup didn't quite sound that appealing to me. I definitely got more and more invested the more and more I read, and it just continued to get better and better. So what I was criticizing a little bit about Queens of Renthia, where I feel like it didn't quite stick the landing, Race the Sands stuck the landing. It was so good. It was so good as a standalone. It was the right amount of time for that story. I didn't feel like we cut off important world building details and then we don't quite get the full picture. I felt like it was the perfect version of what you want from a standalone. So I definitely think it's worth checking out. Both of these are fantastic, and I'm so excited for the Spellshop. It seems like it's getting a lot of buzz. I can't wait to pick it up, and hopefully there will be another Sarah Beth Durst book to recommend. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you are interested in these, I'll have them in the description bar down below. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.